Hello, friends! The 603rd days of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Let's start with the Kherson direction, where the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing over the eastern bank of the Dnipro. The morning report from the General Staff reports a Russian airstrikes of the village of Avdiivka. It is located on the eastern bank of the Dnipro, in the area of the Antonivsky railway bridge, where Russians have been writing signs Tuesday about the landing of the Ukrainian army. That is, the General Staff indirectly confirms the Ukrainian offensive in this area. At the same time, Ukraine has still not officially commented on Russian reports about attacks by Ukrainian forces across the Dnipro. Let me remind you that, according to a statement by the Russian Minister of Defense, Ukrainian troops landed in 4 groups and tried to gain a foothold in this area, but were driven back after attacks by the Russian army. At the same time, some Russian military telegram channels write that the Ukrainian units still remain on the eastern bank. On the map of the Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State, the status of this area on the eastern bank is indicated as unknown, and a small area in the area of the Antonivsky highway bridge is designated as liberated territory. This is the place where the Ukrainian armed forces landed a few months ago. Experts from the American Institute for the Study of War also report the Ukrainian armed forces likely landed on the eastern bank of the Dnipro and took over Russian positions. The footage geolocated by experts shows that the Ukrainian troops have advanced north of the Avdiivka and towards the Poima. My friends, the robot will continue.
According to Russian media reports, experts from the Institute for the Study of War write, Ukrainian forces broke through the defenses of Russian troops and temporarily occupied the entire Poima and positions on the northern outskirts of Avdiivka. As of October 18th, the Russians control only the southern part of Avdiivka, the Institute reports. At the same time, today, some Russian telegram channels began to report high activity of the Ukrainian armed forces near the village of Kherson. According to them, the actions are no longer characterized as separate tasks of sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the Ukrainian army, since much more forces are involved. There are no statements from the Ukrainian side on this matter yet. In the Avdiivka sector, the enemy is not abandoning attempts to encircle Avdiivka with the support of aviation, the General Staff says in its morning report. The department reports that both the city itself and the areas of Novokalinovo to the north of Avdiivka and Pervomaisky to the south were attacked. The head of the city military administration, Barabash, says that there is a new escalation in Avdiivka and that yesterday the number of attacks on populated areas of the community increased. The shelling continued all night. We hear rifle battles from our positions around the clock. They hit with everything they have. A conditional decrease in the degree of tension that had been in our direction for several days. Unfortunately, yesterday we observed, on the contrary, an escalation. The enemy does not give up trying to surround the city and find weak points. Currently, due to the aggravation, humanitarian aid is not being delivered to Avdiivka, where about 1,600 people remain, says Barabash. He also predicts further aggravation in the coming days. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military portal Deep State reports that the enemy has resumed assault operations from Krasnogorivka. Again, a column with a significant amount of armored vehicles moved towards the railway track in order to gain a foothold on it for the subsequent exit to Stepovy. However, the well-coordinated work of the Ukrainian artillerymen did not give success to the next attack of the Russians. As we noted earlier, there is no need to talk about the end of the enemy's offensive actions in the Avdiivka area, because it is unknown how many more reserves they have to go on an assault. And today's assault is an example of the fact that the active phase continues. The Russians still have a strike force from a large amount of equipment and personnel. We are monitoring the situation, writes Deep State. It is obvious that the Russians' attempt to liquidate the Avdiivka defense area of the Ukrainian armed forces has the main goal of moving Ukrainian troops away from the immediate approaches to Donetsk. Despite the use of a large part of the units, the enemy command was unable to find a cardinal solution to achieve its goals. As far as I understand, in the near future, in order to fulfill the assigned task, it will try to do two things in the Avdiivka area. Transfer your main efforts from the southern front of the offensive to the northern and move a number of additional forces and means to the Avdiivka direction. In the Melitopol sector, the Russians unsuccessfully tried to attack east of ATACMS. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces have partial success southwest of Verbovy, the General Staff reports. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to advance, albeit rather slowly, but confidently, in the general direction to the south. In particular, a couple of days ago, Russian units were forced northwest of Verbovy to leave a number of their forward positions and retreat in a southeastern direction. In turn, to the west of Verbovy, the advanced units of the Ukrainian army made a fairly significant spurt, forcing the enemy to retreat to the south. And although the Russians immediately tried to counterattack, they failed to restore the situation. From the information coming from the Melitopol direction, the fighting is very fierce and difficult. Both sides show stubbornness and persistence in achieving their goals. Moreover, the enemy constantly brings tactical reserves to the breakthrough area of the Ukrainian armed forces, which he forms by reforming lost units or those on the verge of losing their level of combat effectiveness, bringing them into temporary tactical groups. At present, further advance of the advanced units of the Ukrainian army in a southern direction is hampered by the fact that the enemy maintains control over two dominant heights between Novoprokopivka and Verbovy, with marks 160 and 170. In essence, the battalion defense area there, located at these heights, is part of the first position of the enemy's main line of defense. Accordingly, the enemy positions at both heights are equipped and prepared for its conduct in engineering and fortification terms and represent quite powerful knots. The United States will continue to supply ATACMS missiles on an ongoing basis, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba said. He answered affirmatively to the question whether the delivery of the first batch of ATACMS means that the United States will transfer them constantly and in larger quantities. Let me remind you that according to the New York Times, the United States transferred about 20 ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces predict that the appearance of the first ATACMS will force the Russians to pull their warehouses and command posts deeper to the rear. The occupiers will now have a lot of trouble out of the blue, since now all this requires finding new places, placement and, of course, this is a very large load on their logistics system, said Yevhenii, head of the press service of the Eastern Group of Forces.
Friends, considering what is happening in my country, this channel is now my only source of income. If you are able to support me financially, I will be very grateful. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.